welcome to the fourth webinar in a series organized by the POLIMP project, an EU-funded project that tries to make information on EU and United Nations climate policy more accessible to decision makers. My name is Matthias Duwe. I work at Ecologic Institute here in Berlin. We have the privilege of hosting this series of webinars. And today our topic is climate finance. Where do we stand before Paris? Because as we are recording today, we are only a few days from the start of the conference. And so I want to welcome, first of all, the two experts that have agreed to join us today to discuss this topic. They are Vicky Noens, who's a principal policy advisor at the Department of Environment at the government of Flanders in Belgium, and Ralph Bodle, who is a colleague of mine here at Ecologic Institute and coordinator of our legal team. Both of them are actually scheduled to go to Paris, not within the hour, but within a few days, because they are both actively engaged in negotiating on behalf of the European Union on the topic of climate finance, with, of course, nuances in terms of the different technical aspects that they're looking at. So we are particularly happy that you have agreed to take the time now in your busy schedule to join us today. Thank you. So let's get right into it, and I would suggest that we start off at a more basic level, which is, why do we speak of a specific type of finance in terms of climate finance? And what does that exactly mean? The fundamentals of your work. Ralph, could you get us started on an explanation? Thank you.
There is no definition of climate finance. As such, it means many things in many different contexts. I suppose at the most basic level, it is finance or money spent or transferred for a specific purpose, and the purpose is related to climate change. And again, at the most basic level, it is finance that is supposed to have something to do with mitigation or adaptation. That's probably the most basic level. But then you can go into probably infinite level of detail. One important distinction is probably whether we talk about climate finance generally from a sort of financial perspective, or whether we talk about it in the context of the UNFCCC, of the negotiations. These two things are exactly the same.
So, Vicky, if I may take that question over to you, when you are not talking to all your other fellow experts, and when you're not sitting in a negotiating session, but when you have to explain to your family, to your neighbors, what the specific topic is that you're working on, how do you explain what climate finance is?
I think then I would actually respond to them that climate finance is mainly a tool to get what we need, which is the 2 degrees goal. But I think Ralph had a good way of saying that there is a distinction between the climate finance as a general approach, and then also the 100 billion question. I mean, the fact that there is no definition from a reporting point of view makes it also a bit difficult, because then we have to report on the wide variety of sources, and then of course you run into those discussion points.
Thank you very much. I think that's an important point that we shall pick up again on in a second, is sort of how this is actually being measured. But let's go one step back and look at what the different interests are here. Money transfers are always a thorny issue, not just in personal relations, but also at a geopolitical level. And so, everybody's been following the international climate change negotiations. Even from afar, will know that this is a bit of a thorn in the side of the negotiations, but also with an important function. So, Ralph, could you maybe have a first take on unpacking this a little bit for us? What are the various interests here on this topic in the negotiations?
Well, before I start, what I say is obviously tinted through my EU glasses and my perspective. So if I miss or underrepresent any particular perspective, that is not intentional, but probably simply due to what I'm doing. for Paris, climate finance has always been an important part of the climate regime, the international way of dealing with climate change. It has been an important part of the original convention of '92. It has also been part of the Kyoto Protocol, and it is an important part of the deal in Paris. So that is probably one of the basic interests, historically originally in the convention from developing countries, that the idea was that climate finance enables developing countries to take action against climate change, and this has been taken along over the years and needs to be incorporated in the Paris deal as well. From the side of the developed countries or donor parties, it is a key interest to reflect changes that have happened in the world since 1992, and which in their view are not reflected in the convention anymore, so to speak. So we've got these two broad interests, keeping the idea that climate finance is there to help developing countries take action, but also the idea of reflecting changes that have happened since '92 in terms of politics, in terms of the economic situation of many countries, and so on. That's probably the basic setup. Slightly more specifically, I guess one key interest is also for many developing countries not to forget adaptation. I suppose that has been made clear over the last couple of months of the negotiations that many countries do not want to lose focus on adaptation simply because everyone is so focused on mitigation for some reason. So that needs to be incorporated, that focus, and that is the key interest at the general level, I'd say, to keep it very, very basic. And then, of course, there is particular interests in terms of sort of subtopics or issues on climate finance. And let me know if you want to know more about this one.
Well, I think I would like to move to the specific area of expertise that Vicky represents in terms of the rules for how we measure and account for climate finance. But maybe we can sort of take the issue of the interests and start off with that with regards to where you work in the negotiations, Vicky, to the extent that you feel comfortable talking about it, and you can say no, this is sort of too confidential. But are there, is this general picture of developing countries are asking for finance and industrialized or Annex I countries under the original setup are trying, not to give in to those demands too much. Is that also the divide that you experience in your negotiation settings, or would you say it's much more nuanced than that? And if you can name names, that I think will make it more interesting for people. But if not, we understand.
You probably mean naming of parties then?
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Yes.
Well, I think in transparency of support discussions, we have a bit less of a contradiction between developing and developed countries. I mean, we have a more openness towards coming to the same goal, which is having a transparent system. But of course, there are some crucial issues as well where we need to discuss. But I think, well, because I'm really into the negotiation mode already now, and yeah, you triggered me a good question about the construction between the different parties. I think there is a good middle ground, and the EU is one of those that can really come forward with probably some bridging proposals on the substance. And I think our partners in this African group and ILAC might be the ones that we can really come together with. And then I'm mainly discussing about the fact that what we want to do is to have a transparent system which will reflect the outcome of the finance article in the agreement, where whatever we decide there needs to be reported on in a transparent way. And that's something that we have a common goal towards. A bit from a different view, because of course for us, for the EU, it's important to show that what we are doing is valid and that we are going to deliver, while for them it is more to have clarity on on knowing that what we are doing is not somehow take a double, having this counting the same efforts twice. It's about, I mean, having clarity that we are actually performing what we are doing. So it comes from a different angle, but I hope so that next week we might be able to come together at in the same common ground.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for being this specific. And I mean, you were now talking about how important it is from a variety of perspectives to have some accountability and transparency. But at the same time, I assume from where we started saying that it's actually very hard to define what exactly is climate finance. It must make it extremely difficult to get to, verifiable data. So can you explain to us a little bit, how that is done and how solid information coming from these processes can be in your perspective?
Well, before doing that, the difficulty is also because of the fact that at this point there is no definition on climate finance, and it is such a broad concept that also the reporting system, the transparency system, has to be quite broad. So the way we are doing it now is every 2 years we have a biannual reports where we all developed countries need to report on, those who have committed to the 100 billion as well. But it doesn't allow to see where we are in the 100 billion, for instance. It's more about the whole climate finance that you as a country provide. And that might be missing kind of the information that we are requesting, that other parties are requesting now, specifically on the 100 billion question. But having this under the UNFCCC system is at this point not, from my point of view, not really possible, because it goes into so much technical discussions where we can't really have agree to because of the political differences between some parties. For instance, the common tabular format that we have right now is, from the one hand, a technical issue, but from the other hand, it includes some paragraphs which is more of a political consensus. If you ask more specific questions, I can go into details, but I don't want to make it too specific.
Absolutely. Well, indeed, I know what you mean in terms of the intricacies of the accounting rules and processes involved. But I think you were hinting at one specific point, which is that a lot of financial transfers, especially from an industrialized to developing country context, are usually being delivered through a variety of channels, but a lot of those are done in the context of development cooperation. And so a more specific question maybe is around the recurring criticism that since it's so hard to define and distinguish, there's a real risk that what ends up happening is that there is essentially a relabeling of existing ODA, for example, as climate finance, or that if such a transfer should take place, and not just a relabeling but a redirection of funds, that it could take away from existing money for other purposes such as education or health, etc. How do you deal with those tricky issues in the accounting system and in the negotiations? Yeah.
Well, let's call it what it is. It's about the additionality of climate finance, and then more specifically with regard to ODA. And well, it's a difficult issue to discuss. But first of all, it's the way the reporting system itself does make a distinction between what can be reported as ODA or other official flows, but it's more about having the agreement on how it will be counted towards climate finance. So maybe Ralph, you can have a go at this as well.
Yes, please, Ralph. Sorry, we have let you sit there and listen as we started off with the expert, but please compliment.
On the additionality question, or?
Yes.
Well, I think Vicky said it all. It is tricky because it is two-faced, I think, additionality. It is a normative concept that it suggests that there's something you can measure technically, properly, saying this is what there should be, and this is what should be additional. But at the same time, it is also a political term when you refer to what it should be additional to. And so this it has always been controversial whenever we sit together at the negotiating table. It has always been controversial about whether whatever has been flowing was additional or wasn't additional and good enough. That's why I feel quite helpless sometimes in being torn between it as having it being used as a political term, more or less, and the attempts to make it technical, countable, verifiable, which is probably maybe possible to some degree, but probably not to the final degree, considering that even the donor countries have different ways of counting what they provide amongst themselves, and they don't even agree amongst themselves all the time as to what they think they provide. Even internally in countries have internal difficulties in agreeing what they count as what and what not.
Yeah.
And I guess different ways of counting for money are always possible and plausible. There's probably at some stage not always one right and one wrong way, I guess.
Yeah. So if I understand that correctly, essentially there isn't a straightforward way to arrive at very exact and precise figures, but at the same time there has to be a way of assuring or providing assurance that indeed the support that is meant to be delivered, and Vicky already mentioned a specific figure a couple of times, the 100 billion of support from a variety of sources that are meant to be provided annually, or well, up to that figure by 2020. So to provide some assurance that indeed there is money that is new, which is, I think, a word that's linked to this figure. And so, A question, is that a relatively correct summary? And then B, do you think, is this actually still a key issue, or do you think that issue of additionality is largely solved, or that in a sense of assurance is being provided? Maybe Vicky, you can have a first shot.
Yes, well, I think the question of additionality is definitely not fully solved at this point. We do. Every party has to report what they consider to be new and additional, but then you have such a large variety, which, well, it doesn't give for developing countries, it doesn't give the necessary assurance that they are looking for. But it's one of those discussions where it's, like Ralph already mentioned, it's more of a political question to solve it, and you can't leave it to the reporting system then to solve how it will be counted. So the way we approach the reporting system as such is to make sure that we have a transparent system where everybody could then, if they are willing to look at all the different rows and tables and columns, see what, according to their definition of additionality, can count towards climate finance. Unfortunately, the way the process is at this point doesn't allow that yet to do such an easy exercise. So there will be thousands of rows to look into it, but it doesn't even allow to do this.
Yeah.
More about having also the accessibility to the information that we would try to improve. But yeah.
Thank you very much. I think that's getting very much to the political significance of this issue, and let me make that a very specific question to you, Ralph. A few days to the starting pistol of COP21, what is the political significance of climate finance as an issue and the progress towards these 100 billion by 2020 for the negotiations?
Well, you mentioned it already, and it is part of the assurance. I think part of the deal that donor countries or developed countries provide assurance, as promised in Copenhagen and Cancun, that they take mobilizing these amounts of money seriously. And I think it is showing that seriousness about mobilizing finance. That is the political significance. At least that's how I see it. Because 100 billion is a promise by 2020, That's how it was made in Copenhagen and Cancun, whereas the Paris deal is supposed to kick in from 2020 onwards. But of course, it is part of the deal in that sense, I suppose, showing this assurance that this is happening in a approximately verifiable manner, credible manner, is part of getting the political credibility for many other building blocks of the Paris Agreement. That's how I see it. A building block that helps, hopefully helps.
So is it a building block, or is it sort of fair to say, is it a little bit of a glue? Can you imagine a deal being, can you imagine a deal being struck or an overall agreement being reached without, a successful or, well, a negotiation solution to this topic?
Well, that is not quite possible because we're in 2015, right? the 100 billion are not there yet. They are promised to be reached. The promise is to reach them, to have 100 billion per year by 2020, and we are in 2015. So what we'll need is a credible assurance that we're on the way, so to speak, as donors. And that is something I think you can't say in a binary manner, it is there or it is not there. Since you can't say the 100 billion are there, but then the promise wasn't to have 100 billion by 2015. So
no, and I didn't mean to focus on the number too much, but
yeah,
on, sort of
it has taken a life on its own.
Maybe it's sort of, if you allow, Vicky, as a personal question, somebody who's been sort of also involved in these negotiations for a long time on an issue that's both technical and so political at the same time. Do you in the negotiations get that sense of how sometimes the big political weight, kind of lands in your negotiation group?
Oh, yes, definitely, and that's one of the tricky issues that we will have to deal with in Paris as well. One example is, for instance, that many of other parties sent not their real transparency support experts, but more of their transparency experts. So then you already have a bit of a friction between the knowledge of the technical details. So we have to deal with this more from the political importance, and then explain or help them to see how actually the details will actually help to get their political points across. So it's a tricky issue to deal with, especially with some of those colleagues. But it's also a challenge, and I'm looking forward to it again. Yeah.
Well, one more specific question on since you are both obviously have been and will be negotiating, coming from different country delegations within Europe, but negotiating within the same sort of team of negotiators for the European Union. You may not be in a position to provide a neutral, independent answer to the next question, but what do you think? What does the EU bring to the table on climate finance? And can you say a few more words on that? Maybe Ralph, you can start.
Oh, tricky one. Well, if you ask me about bringing to the table amount or some X, Y, or Z dollars, I obviously
Euros,
can't
hopefully.
say it. But that's not really what we're talking about, at least in at the table, I think. What the EU brings to the table, I think, is first an understanding that this is not, you're right, we are right, you're wrong, or vice versa. That this is a deal, a package where different interests need to be balanced, and we are happy to find a balance, so to speak. Then, secondly, our own view, at least, is that we are middle ground. We try to find solutions that could be middle ground for everyone. That's at least how we see it. But then I guess probably every country sees itself that way. Who knows? Then the other thing the EU brings to the table, I hope, are proposals and arguments that will move us away from a sole focus on a number or a sum that should go from developed countries to developing countries. Well, that is one issue. but I hope we as the EU are bringing to the table plausible arguments that this is not the whole picture. And that is something we try in the negotiations to anchor in the text as well, that climate finance is not just about one group of countries providing X amount of public money to another group of countries, but that in order to achieve the purpose of what we're doing there, fighting climate change, a bit more is needed from everyone. And we hope that we succeed in anchoring this idea without appearing to try to evade our commitments. That is probably the biggest challenge. If I have to be more specific, I would have to go into certain articles and concepts, which is probably of no interest.
That is not the level of technical detail that we're looking for. Vicky, is
but I hope I've.
Yeah, I think you you made a clear point without stepping outside of the mandate. I would hope. But then, Vicky, is there something you would like to add? Where do you see maybe in your area of the negotiations? What is the EU bringing to the table?
Yeah, well, I actually fully agree with what just Ralph said. I think that we hope that the EU is the one who can help providing the middle ground to come to an agreement on those political and technical issues. So yeah, I would actually really just agree to what Ralph just said, and the same for us. Yeah.
And so obviously we didn't really talk about the specifics of how much money currently has been calculated as having been having flown with regard to the 100 billion. I think there's a new report out recently that's estimating that we're looking at figures over 50 billion. Is that correct, roughly? So, and at the same time, there are European countries that have made very specific contributions to the Green Climate Fund already over the course of the last year and a bit. But do you expect that there will be, as part of a more political deal that is, way above our respective pay grades, that additional coffers of money will be brought to Paris to make sure that something more substantial than than what's written in a line of text might appear?
Who wants?
I didn't address. I'm the general sense of this is, I'm having a conversation with two people that I'm looking at the same time, and that this is a conversation. But indeed, I need to address this specifically. So, you go first, Vicky, and then Ralph. So, is there going to be money being pulled out of a bag somewhere, you think?
Well, I think it's definitely the political pressure to do so is definitely there, and as you said, many parties already have done so. So yeah, we might see, but that would be really for the high-level segment for the political leaders to decide upon. So that will, and yeah, let's see. I'm actually curious myself to see what will happen during those last days.
Yeah. And Ralph, your take on this?
Same as Vicky. Luckily, I can't possibly comment. Luckily,
yes, of course not.
But you're right in saying it is. I think it's important to remember that there have been numbers in various fora and circumstances for the Green Climate Fund. There have also been money has also been put on the table to keep the Adaptation Fund alive, which has problems under the KP, and also the other funds that are still around, the LDDCF, which is important for the least developed countries, for instance. So numbers have been put on the table in the last couple of months.
When you say put on the table, did you say in the text?
Yeah.
My apologies.
No, sorry, I mean actually contributed.
Thank you.
You pledged or contributed to the funds and institutions I mentioned. So that is one thing to keep in mind. I'm not sure whether. I can't imagine that there is an automatic expectation that numbers or amounts would be put on the table in Paris because this is simply the way it has to be. I personally find it difficult to imagine that this is an automatic expectation. I suppose it would have to be a very important part of something, that it is there for in exchange for a package, I suppose.
Yeah.
That's a purely personal, non-authorized, I know what's happening political view.
Yes. Well, and I'm sorry, I did ask you both basically to get out your crystal balls there, rather than your negotiating text. And
well, there are numbers in the text. Well, there are proposals in the negotiating text that have concrete figures. For instance, the 100 billion promise has been taken up and turned into a proposal to have the 100 billion in the new agreement as a starting point for the future. So there are numbers as part of the actual text negotiations.
Yeah, and if I may add something on this, I mean, of course, whatever happens as a state, whatever the announcements will be during the COP are important things, but those are more of a short-term vision, while what we are working on is more on the longer term, what should be in the text, and if it's numbers or not, that's also for discussions to have. But to me, those messages will be much more important than than the political announcement that will be made, because it's about more the future and the post-2020 discussion that we are focusing on.
Yeah. So I indeed thank you for that, and I realize that this shows, sort of my the low level of general understanding and focusing on the bit that maybe reporters might seize on, as in, oh, there's money that's been brought to Paris, which may be much of less significance than other issues under negotiation there in this general realm. And I think it's very useful that you've pointed out again how there's been a build-up and a lot of developments have been taking place also on climate finance in the process of preparing for the conference in Paris. And so, this is not a situation where, everything still has to happen in Paris, but where a lot of momentum has been building towards the conference. Which would take me to what I would like to make the last question to you, which is slightly less focused on climate finance, but you could make it more topic specific. But as we're sending you off now, into your last frenzy of preparations before you get on your respective trains, planes, whatever, to go to Paris, what are your own hopes and wishes for the outcome of the conference, as you will leave there again in 2.5 weeks' time? What are you hoping, to be taking home? Vicky, would you like to start?
Well, the first thing that popped up in my head is that it's an added value, but that would be on the whole agreement, that it has to be an added value to the work that we've been doing so far. And if I want to have a look at it from my own
yes, please.
Which is transparency support, then I hope that we have the clarity and we on what is going to be provided or what is committed towards on climate finance, that we also report on it in transparent and comparable ways, so we have the clarity that is requested both by donors and recipients. So it's and that might be already a bit enthusiastic and overreaching the possibilities, but we have to go for it, I guess.
And Ralph, what are you hoping to leave Paris with? An agreement in your bag? What does that look like?
I liked what Vicky said, actually. I like the added value phrase. I'm at the end of the day, personally, I'm not that fussed about the form of it, as long as I believe, as long as I think it's credible that parties will be doing something, that we're not going through the motions in Paris. That's why I like Vicky's phrase of added value.
Added value for global climate protection.
Yeah, for policies of parties to actually do something other or more than before. And if an international agreement of whatever form helps getting this sort of trust and credibility, that that parties don't just shy away by saying, oh, I don't want to be the first. I'm not doing something if the others don't. If we achieve that by whatever means or whatever text, that would be probably my hope for it. In terms of non-specific, I want this provision or that article or this commitment. At a general level, I think the added value that Vicky said is a good way to describe it.
Excellent. Well, thank you both very, very much for your time, for providing sort of your take on this, on one of the key topics to be watching out for in the next 2.5 weeks in Paris. We sort of wish you overall, very much success for the conference as a whole, and it indeed ending with meaningful impact and added value for global climate protection and towards the overall goal of staying below 2 degrees and avoiding dangerous climate change. And we hope that you also, of course, both will be able to stay sane in the madness of very, very long days. So, return safely, and now best of luck with your final preparations.
Thank you for your
Cheers.
Thank you. Okay, so this closes our 4th installment of the POLIMP Webinar Series. We will be back in 2016 with a roundup of what has been decided in Paris. Knock on all kinds of wood, and so we look forward to seeing many of you again then. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.